June 4, 1942, 9 a.m., Berlin. In the operations wing of the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler is receiving routine military briefings compiled overnight from across Europe and beyond. The Eastern Front dominates the agenda, but a short intelligence summary from the Pacific is included, relayed through German naval attachés and intercepted signals. It concerns a Japanese operation near a remote atoll called Midway, northwest of Hawaii, where the Imperial Japanese Navy has engaged American carrier forces. At this hour, the information is incomplete, cautious, and deliberately restrained. It does not yet describe victory or defeat. It reports contact, losses, and uncertainty. For months, German leadership had accepted Japanese naval dominance as a fixed condition of the war. The attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941 had reinforced this belief. 4 months later, German intelligence assessments still assumed that Japan controlled the Pacific Initiative and that American carrier strength had been badly reduced. That assumption had shaped Germany's strategic calculations, particularly the belief that the United States would remain overstretched, divided between oceans, and slow to concentrate its full strength against Europe. Inside the German High Command, the first Midway reports are read without alarm. The language is technical, cautious, and filtered through Japanese channels that emphasize engagement rather than outcome. Aircraft losses are mentioned without totals. Carrier movements are described without confirmation of damage. The battle is framed as ongoing. At this stage, no one in Berlin speaks of disaster. What they do note is the absence of the expected declaration of decisive Japanese success. Wilhelm Keitel, Chief of the Armed Forces High Command, receives the same intelligence summary shortly after Hitler. He has spent much of the morning reviewing logistical updates from the Eastern Front, where preparations are underway for a renewed summer offensive. To Keitel, Midway initially registers as peripheral. Germany's war, as he understands it, will be decided on land in the East. The Pacific War remains Japan's responsibility. Yet even in these first hours, Keitel notices a deviation from previous patterns. Japanese communications are slower, claims are narrower, certainty is missing. By midday, additional intercepts and diplomatic cables arrive. They do not clarify the situation. Instead, they complicate it. One report references the loss of Japanese aircraft in significant numbers. Another suggests that American carriers were not caught at anchor, as at Pearl Harbor, but were already at sea and actively counterattacking. This detail matters. It implies preparation, intelligence success, and operational competence on the American side. For German planners accustomed to underestimating American military effectiveness, this is an unwelcome signal. Alfred Jodl, head of operations, reviews the evolving intelligence with growing attention. Jodl has long argued that the United States should not be dismissed as militarily naive. He understands war as a system, not a single battle, and he is sensitive to shifts in momentum. The absence of clear Japanese success concerns him more than confirmed losses would have. In modern warfare, silence often signals damage control. Jodl begins to request follow-up reports, particularly regarding carrier losses. He receives none that provide reassurance. As the afternoon progresses, internal briefings adjust their language. The battle is now described as costly. American resistance is characterized as unexpectedly strong. Japanese objectives are described as contested rather than achieved. Still, no explicit admission of defeat appears. This restraint reflects both uncertainty and cultural practice. Japanese military communications are designed to preserve authority and confidence, especially with allies. German officers understand this, but they also understand what is missing. Within Hitler's circle, discussion remains limited. Hitler himself shows little outward reaction. He is known for focusing on immediate priorities and dismissing unfavorable news until it becomes unavoidable. The Pacific theater lies far from his direct control, yet the strategic implications are clear enough to register. If American carriers are still operational, then the United States retains its offensive capacity. If Japan has failed to destroy them, then the American industrial base will have time to act. By early evening, a more detailed assessment reaches Berlin through naval intelligence channels. It suggests that at least one Japanese carrier has been severely damaged, possibly lost. The report is marked unconfirmed. No numbers are attached. Even so, the implication is serious. German naval planners have studied carrier warfare closely, particularly its implications for sea control and power projection. The loss of a carrier is not a tactical setback. It is a strategic event. Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine arm, reviews the information later that night. He has long regarded American shipbuilding capacity as the central problem Germany will eventually face. Submarine warfare depends on attrition and time. If the United States retains its naval corps and accelerates production, then time favors the enemy. Midway, even without full clarity, suggests that American naval leadership is learning faster than expected. By the end of June 4th, no formal conclusions were issued in Berlin. No statements are made. No adjustments are announced. But among senior officers, a quiet reassessment has begun. The war they envisioned, one in which Japan holds the Pacific and Germany defeats the Soviet Union before American power fully mobilizes, now contains a serious uncertainty. The assumption of uninterrupted Japanese success can no longer be taken for granted. What remains unspoken that night is the larger implication. If American carriers have survived and inflicted major losses, then the United States is not only present in the war, but actively shaping it. For the first time since December 1941, German commanders are forced to consider that the global balance they relied upon may already be shifting beyond their control. 2 days after the initial reports from the Pacific, a consolidated intelligence assessment is delivered to the highest levels of German command. The uncertainty that characterized the first day has been replaced by confirmation. 4 Japanese fleet carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, have been destroyed near Midway. Hundreds of experienced pilots and deck crews are gone. The American carriers involved remain operational. The engagement is no longer described as contested. It is identified as a decisive Japanese defeat. Adolf Hitler receives the report during a scheduled military conference. The setting is familiar. Senior commanders seated around a long table, maps of the Eastern Front dominating the room. The Pacific update is delivered as a secondary item, but its content immediately disrupts the meeting's rhythm. Hitler does not interrupt. He listens. His reaction is restrained, but his posture changes. He asks questions not about Japan's losses, but about American capabilities. How many carriers were involved? How quickly replacements could be built? Whether this result indicates coincidence or competence. For Hitler, the significance of Midway lies not in the Pacific theater itself, but in what it reveals about the United States. His worldview has long rested on the assumption that America is industrially powerful but strategically slow, politically divided, and culturally unprepared for sustained war. Pearl Harbor had been interpreted as confirmation. Midway challenges that belief. The battle suggests intelligence penetration, rapid decision-making, and coordinated carrier operations under pressure. These are not traits of an unready opponent. Wilhelm Keitel observes the shift in tone immediately. The conversation turns away from Japan's operational error and toward American potential. This is an uncomfortable direction. German planning has depended on time to defeat the Soviet Union, time to force Britain into exhaustion, time to limit American involvement to material support. Midway implies that time is no longer neutral. Alfred Jodl addresses the implications directly. He notes that Japan has lost not only ships, but irreplaceable personnel. Carrier warfare depends on trained air crews and experienced deck officers. These losses cannot be replaced quickly. The United States, by contrast, has not lost equivalent assets. Its industrial system is already expanding. Shipyards on both coasts are operating at unprecedented pace. Yodel does not speculate. He states measurable facts: carrier construction schedules, aircraft production figures, training pipelines. The contrast is stark. Hitler reacts defensively. He criticizes Japanese operational planning and suggests that the loss reflects tactical misjudgment rather than systemic weakness. He argues that the war in Europe remains decisive and that Japan's role is to tie down American forces, not to win the war alone. Yet even as he speaks, the strategic balance he describes is under strain. Japan was expected to eliminate American naval power in the Pacific, not merely delay it. Karl Dönitz listens carefully. His focus is narrower, but no less consequential. Submarine warfare against American shipping depends on assumptions about escort availability, ship replacement rates, and naval priorities. If the United States retains its carriers and accelerates production, then convoy protection will improve. Losses that once seemed sustainable will become unacceptable. Dönitz understands that industrial war favors the side that can absorb damage without operational collapse. Midway suggests that America possesses that capacity. Inside the German Navy's planning offices, Midway prompts a reevaluation of long-term expectations. The assumption that Japan will dominate the Pacific indefinitely is quietly withdrawn from internal documents. New assessments describe the Pacific War as dynamic rather than settled. This language shift matters. It signals recognition that American forces are not merely recovering, but adapting. For Hitler, the psychological impact is delayed but deep. He has always believed that willpower and ideological commitment can overcome material disadvantage. Midway contradicts this belief by demonstrating that organization, intelligence, and production can reverse initial inferiority. The United States entered the war late, but it did not enter blindly. Its naval command has already learned from defeat. As the conference ends, no orders are issued in response to Midway. There is no operational adjustment Germany can make in the Pacific, but the illusion of predictability has been broken. The war is no longer unfolding according to the sequence Germany anticipated. The enemy Hitler dismissed as decadent and indecisive has demonstrated clarity and resolve. That evening, internal memoranda circulated among senior planners. They do not use dramatic language. They do not predict defeat. They do, however, revise timelines. They extend estimates. They acknowledge risk. These documents will never be read aloud to the public. They are meant for those who understand what has changed. Midway has not altered the battlefield in Europe. Soviet armies still stand in the east. British bombers still strike German cities. But the horizon has shifted. The United States has revealed itself as an active, capable belligerent. The war Germany intended to conclude quickly is becoming a war of endurance. And endurance, more than courage or ideology, will decide who remains standing when belief alone is no longer enough. In the days and weeks following the Battle of Midway, the language used inside Germany's senior command changed in tone and content. Publicly, nothing is said. Official communications continue to emphasize confidence, resolve, and inevitable victory. Privately, however, the senior leadership of the German military begins to speak with a clarity that had been absent since the early years of the war. Midway becomes a fixed reference point in internal discussions, not because of its location or its participants, but because of what it reveals about the enemy Germany now faces. Alfred Jodl records his concerns in operational memoranda circulated only among the highest planning staff. He does not dwell on Japan's mistakes. Instead, he focuses on the American response. He notes that American carrier forces were not only present, but properly positioned, indicating successful intelligence work and command discipline. He points out that American naval aviation executed coordinated strikes under pressure, achieving decisive results in a narrow time window. For Jodl, this suggests a learning enemy, one capable of correcting errors rapidly. He does not frame this as a future risk. He frames it as a present condition. Wilhelm Keitel's remarks during staff conferences are more guarded but no less revealing. He emphasizes the need to accelerate operations in the East, arguing that Germany must achieve decisive results before American strength can be fully applied. His urgency reflects an understanding shared by many in the room. The war's timeline is no longer open-ended. Midway has shortened it. Every month that passes without resolution now favors the enemy. Within naval command circles, Karl Dönitz is increasingly direct. He argues that the United States has demonstrated the ability to absorb losses without strategic paralysis. This is the central advantage of an industrial power operating far from its homeland. Dönitz warns that submarine successes will be temporary unless production targets can be overwhelmed. He acknowledges privately that this outcome is unlikely. American shipbuilding figures continue to rise. Escort numbers increase. Training programs expand. Midway reinforces his belief that the United States is organizing for a war measured in years, not campaigns. These discussions are not emotional in tone, but they are unmistakably anxious in substance. The generals no longer debate whether the United States can fight effectively. They debate how long Germany can delay the inevitable concentration of American power in Europe. This shift marks a psychological turning point. The enemy is no longer abstract or underestimated. It is defined, measured, and increasingly respected. Adolf Hitler's presence complicates these conversations. In his formal conferences, he continues to express confidence in Germany's destiny and dismisses concerns about American intervention as exaggerated. He attributes Midway to Japanese tactical error rather than American competence. Yet his private behavior suggests awareness of deeper problems. He interrupts briefings more frequently. He demands production figures. He questions assumptions that previously went unchallenged. His need for control intensifies as his certainty erodes. Among the generals, there is no unified response. Some cling to the belief that decisive victory in the East will render American power irrelevant. Others doubt this openly, though only in restricted settings. What unites them is the recognition that Germany is now fighting a global war against an opponent with unmatched resources and demonstrated adaptability. Midway becomes shorthand for that reality. The most revealing statements occur not in formal meetings, but in marginal notes, after-action reviews, and private correspondence. These documents reflect a professional military assessment stripped of ideology. They acknowledge that Japan's carrier losses are irreplaceable in the near term. They recognize that American training pipelines are expanding faster than Axis planners anticipated. They accept that the technological gap is narrowing, not widening. No one speaks of surrender. No one predicts defeat outright. But the language of inevitability begins to appear, carefully, indirectly. Phrases about unfavorable ratios, extended timelines, and cumulative disadvantages recur with increasing frequency. These are not the words of men who believe the war can be shaped at will. They are the words of men who understand that control is slipping. Midway also alters how German generals view coordination within the Axis alliance. The assumption of parallel success is replaced by concern over divergent capacity. Japan's loss exposes the vulnerability of relying on an ally whose industrial base cannot match its opponent. The war is no longer synchronized. It is fragmented, uneven, and increasingly difficult to manage. As summer advances, these internal assessments grow more somber. The Eastern Front demands immense resources. Air defense strains under increasing Allied bombing. Submarine losses mount. Midway does not cause these pressures, but it clarifies their trajectory. It confirms that the enemy is not only resisting, but improving. For the German generals who see this clearly, Midway marks the moment when professional judgment overtakes ideological certainty. They continue to serve. They continue to plan. But beneath their discipline lies an understanding that the war's balance has shifted in a way that cannot be reversed by will alone. What they do not yet know is how long the war will last, or how complete the consequences will be. They know only that the assumptions of the past no longer hold, and that the future will be shaped by forces beyond their control. Inside German planning offices, the consequences of Midway are no longer discussed as a single naval defeat. They are treated as evidence of a structural imbalance that cannot be corrected. Strategic memoranda drafted in the summer of 1942 begin to reflect a new understanding of the war's direction. The focus shifts from achieving victory to managing risk, delaying collapse, and extracting maximum effect from diminishing resources. Midway stands as a confirmation that time, once Germany's ally, is now working against it. Alfred Jodl reviews updated production figures alongside operational forecasts. The numbers are precise and unforgiving. American aircraft output continues to climb. Shipyards expand capacity rather than merely replacing losses. Training programs scale upward with industrial growth. These trends are not speculative, they are measurable. Jodl recognizes that even flawless execution on Germany's part cannot close the gap. Modern war, he understands, is not decided by brilliance alone, but by sustained output and replacement. Midway demonstrates that the United States can suffer early losses and still emerge stronger. Within the Naval Command, Karl Dönitz pressed for intensified submarine warfare as the only remaining lever available to Germany. He argues that the Atlantic remains the decisive theater where American power can be disrupted before it reaches Europe in full strength. Yet even Dönitz acknowledges the limits of this strategy. Escort technology improves, air coverage expands, loss rates rise. The balance between ships sunk and submarines lost grows less favorable with each passing month. Midway reinforces his fear that the United States will not be delayed long enough to matter. For Wilhelm Keitel, the implications are operational rather than abstract. He urges acceleration on all fronts, faster offensives, greater risk acceptance. He believes that only decisive action can prevent the convergence of American, British, and Soviet power. But these recommendations encounter resistance from reality. Logistics strain under expansion, fuel shortages increase, manpower losses accumulate, the system is already stretched to its limits. Midway does not create these problems, but it removes the illusion that they can be overcome through initiative alone. Adolf Hitler responds to these assessments with increasing rigidity. He rejects proposals that imply strategic contraction or prioritization. He insists that willpower and resolve can offset material disadvantage. Yet his directives become more detailed, more intrusive, and less flexible. This behavior reflects pressure rather than confidence. He senses that the margin for error has vanished. Midway has shown that the enemy does not need to be superior everywhere to be decisive. It needs only to endure. The German military begins to understand that the war has entered a phase where outcomes will be determined cumulatively. Each loss compounds the next. Each delay benefits the enemy. Midway exemplifies this shift. Japan's loss of 4 carriers cannot be reversed quickly, if at all. The experienced crews are gone. The training pipeline cannot replace them in time. Meanwhile, American carriers remain active, supported by expanding infrastructure. The asymmetry is clear. Strategic discussions increasingly reference the concept of irreversibility. Certain thresholds, once crossed, cannot be restored. Midway is identified as one such threshold. It signals the point at which American naval power moves from recovery to expansion. For Germany, this means that the prospect of keeping the United States permanently divided between oceans has failed. American forces will eventually concentrate. The question is no longer if, but when. This realization alters the tone of German planning. Optimistic projections disappear. Contingency planning becomes dominant. Leaders speak less about shaping events and more about responding to them. The language of inevitability grows more common, though never publicly acknowledged. The war Germany hoped to conclude through speed and shock is transforming into a prolonged struggle of attrition against an opponent uniquely suited to endure it. Midway also reframes the moral dimension of the conflict for some within the German officer corps. They begin to see that ideology cannot manufacture resources or replace skilled labor. Belief does not produce steel, fuel, or trained pilots. The United States fights not from desperation, but from capacity. This distinction matters. It means that the enemy's strength will increase over time rather than diminish. By late summer, Midway is no longer debated. It is accepted. It becomes part of the baseline from which all future planning proceeds. The war is now understood as unwinnable through conventional means, though this conclusion remains confined to private thought. Duty, discipline, and hierarchy ensure that operations continue. Orders are obeyed. Plans are drafted. But beneath this structure lies an awareness that the outcome is slipping beyond control. What Midway ultimately represents for German leadership is not defeat, but exposure. It reveals the true nature of the conflict they have entered. A war not decided by singular victories, but by the accumulation of capacity over time. A war in which Germany's strengths are finite, and its enemies are expanding. The question that now lingers is not how to win, but how long the system can hold before the imbalance becomes impossible to conceal. By the end of 1942, the Battle of Midway had disappeared from public German discourse. It is not mentioned in speeches, newspapers, or official summaries of the war. No explanations are offered. No lessons are acknowledged. The event exists only in internal documents and private understanding. For the German military leadership, Midway is no longer a shock. It has become a quiet reference point, a moment fixed in memory as the first clear signal that the war's direction cannot be reversed. Adolf Hitler continues to speak of ultimate victory. His public rhetoric grows more insistent, more absolute, as the strategic situation deteriorates. He demands loyalty, sacrifice, and belief. Yet his decisions increasingly reflect constraint rather than confidence. He rejects withdrawal, refuses prioritization, and insists on holding ground regardless of cost. This rigidity is not the posture of a leader expanding opportunity. It is the posture of one attempting to deny loss of control. Midway remains unspoken, but its lesson underlies every narrowing option. Within the senior officer corps, the knowledge acquired in 1942 deepens into resignation. Alfred Jodl continues to plan operations with professional rigor, but his assessments now assume prolonged conflict against materially superior enemies. He focuses on efficiency, coordination, and damage limitation. The language of possibility has been replaced by the language of management. The war is no longer framed as something to be won quickly, but as something to be endured as long as possible. Wilhelm Keitel, bound closely to Hitler's authority, suppresses doubts and enforces obedience. He understands the implications of Midway and the expanding American role, yet his position allows no deviation. The system he serves depends on discipline, not dissent. Silence becomes a form of survival within the command structure. What cannot be changed is not discussed openly. What is known is carried privately. Karl Dönitz continues his campaign in the Atlantic with determination, even as losses mount. American shipbuilding outpaces sinkings, escort tactics improve, air coverage closes the gaps that submarines once exploited. Dönitz recognizes the pattern clearly. The enemy absorbs damage and grows stronger. The imbalance identified after Midway has matured into dominance. Still, he presses forward, not because he believes victory is achievable, but because the system demands action until it collapses. Among German planners, Midway comes to represent the moment when outcomes became cumulative and irreversible. It is understood as the point at which American power began moving from potential to application. The United States does not rush. It builds, it trains, it coordinates. By the time American forces appear in decisive strength in Europe, the outcome is already shaped by years of preparation. Those who understood this early carry the burden of foresight without agency. As Allied bombing intensifies and the Eastern Front drains manpower and material, the awareness first sharpened by Midway spreads quietly through the upper ranks. There is no single moment of acknowledgement. There is no collective admission. The truth settles gradually through patterns, figures, and repeated confirmation. The war Germany hoped to control through speed and will has become a process driven by attrition and capacity. The contrast between public narrative and private understanding grows wider. Propaganda promises salvation. Internal documents calculate depletion. Officers continue to serve, bound by oath and structure, even as belief erodes. This coexistence of duty and doubt defines the final years of the war for Germany's leadership. They are no longer fighting for victory as they once defined it. They are fighting to postpone the inevitable. Midway's place in this story is not dramatic in hindsight. No German cities burn because of it. No armies retreat immediately. Its power lies in what it revealed early to those trained to see patterns rather than headlines. It exposed the fundamental imbalance at the heart of the conflict, an imbalance that ideology could not correct and courage could not offset. When the war finally ended in Europe in 1945, the outcome shocked civilians, but not those who studied the numbers years earlier. For them, the conclusion has been visible since the moment American carriers survived and struck back in the Pacific. Midway did not end the war. It clarified it. The generals who understood this carried the knowledge in silence, continuing to serve a system that could not adapt to the reality it faced. Their words, preserved in internal records and private reflections, reveal a war already lost long before it was publicly conceded. And in that silence lies the enduring lesson of Midway, that modern war is decided not by belief or declaration, but by capacity, adaptation, and time. Subscribe for more deeply researched, human-centered documentaries revealing the unseen truths behind history's turning points.